So my background is quite varied, really, and it goes back. I'm in my 50s, so I'm one of the older end of the generations. And my background really comes from, I started at 15 with no qualifications. So I started in stop motion in a little studio where I was just doing basic little modeling jobs and whatever I could do. I was always drawing at a very young age. And bear in mind that was in the 80s. So I started literally just doing whatever I could do to get into that industry without qualifications, straight from school. And quickly found out that I needed something else, which was money. So it didn't last very long, and I realized that I needed to change that a little bit. And I started working in a graphic, not graphic design, a CAD based, so somewhere that was doing steelwork design. So my brother worked there, and he was a steelwork designer. So I got my first taste of 3D before it was even on a computer. So it was back to the drawing boards, and it was drawing in the old-fashioned ways, and starting to learn that way of designing. And from there, I realized that was definitely for me, that and drawing, because I was doing a lot of illustration at the time. And that worked for me then. So I then got some commercial graphics qualifications, and I bought a house at 18. So it was going very well at that stage. And then I got made redundant. So that threw us into a bit of a pickle at that stage. And then what happened was, it was really fortuitous that I joined. I didn't go into the art world. I went into retail to make some money. Just literally getting a job while I found all the work as a illustrator and designer. And bear in mind now that this is kind of like that's like the start of the 90s, and PCs were capable of running things like 3D Studio Max. My brother had started to move into designing. He's 10 years older than me, so he was already getting into designing steelwork on a computer. And I thought, right, I'll get into a bit of that. So 1991, I started with 3D Studio Max. And that was it, really. I was kind of hooked with 3D modeling, but I didn't have a job in the industry. I stayed in retail. And oddly, I did well at that as well. So I was earning very, very good money. I became a regional coach, and I was doing all sorts of jobs around the country while I was keeping the artwork going, knowing full well that I was going to come back when I found the right role. But on the way, I got some qualifications in management and training and even teaching to some degree. So that really set me up then to manage teams of people, motivate teams of people, train teams of people, and I still had the art skills. So by now, it's kind of like into the like late 90s, and this is where it gets fun, really, for anyone who's into this kind of stuff. So Pixar's kind of inspiring everyone with things like Toy Story 3, where subdivision modeling's come along. So Jerry's Game, the little short that they did, that was the first time they used subdivision modeling. Before that, anything I'd modeled was just, quite angular. There wasn't any, organic stuff, or it was NURBS based, so spline based, which I know is, obviously a lot of what Gravity Sketch does is still based in that world. So I kind of like thought, right, I needed, I didn't get into, I didn't get a job back in the industry at that point. I carried on making videos, believe it or not, back then. And by 99, I found a company called Pixologic who had a little script, a little program called ZBrush. So if you bear in mind, that's 21 years ago now. People think that ZBrush is quite new in the market, and it's not. It's well established as a sculpting program. But that definitely solidified what I was going to do for a career. And I got to meet people like Bay Ray, who was working on Lord of the Rings, and a few people that some people will remember their names, like a guy called Martin Kroll and Ken Brilliant. These are all guys who were in the industry working on movies like Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. And I got into that crowd and really heavily got into it without being in the industry. So I was very, very lucky. I worked for Pixologic doing some, design work for them really in the early days. But by then it was just a case of how quickly can I get back into the industry. And it took a few years and juggling the money, but I just literally started a limited company and just went straight in for the jugular. I didn't really do that much freelancing. I just went straight and got some clients. And that was it. Everything since then was either 3D or concepting, or generally creatures, generally characters, generally organic, even if it's vehicles or environments. And I worked on some really horrible things and some really fun things. So I worked on, trying to think how far back I can go. I worked on things like the second Dungeons and Dragons film. So I worked on dragons for that, and I cut my teeth on a lot of TV shows and did a lot of concept work for low end TV shows. But it taught me a hell of a lot. And at that point, I was quite well embedded with training, so I could train people on whatever I was, whatever I wanted to, really, because I'd got the training skills from the other career. So I was training ZBrush right back in those early days. I was training it from 2000, even while I had another job. So by the time I set the company up, I had a good reputation as a digital sculptor, which was just becoming a thing, really. And then I started getting clients. So I've got one of my first clients was a TV company in New York, and then I got a couple of TV shows, and again 2D and 3D. So we were doing concept sculpting even back then. And then it just rolled on for a good few years. I did a lot of jobs where I had to go on movies myself. So I went on to, it started to literally say, right, keep the company going. Had a couple of staff, but then started to go and say, right, what do I want to do? What do I want to learn differently? So I went and joined shows like Penny Dreadful, and actually physically went there for a few months, worked in the art department, learned how to do things like sculpting and then getting it into the rapid prototyping, so big prints, 2.5, 3 meter blocks. And then I thought, right, these guys could use ZBrush. So I wrote a course for ZBrush for sculptors, physical sculptors. So that rolled into a course, and that led me into opening the studio here, which was a physical training studio for ZBrush. And that then brings us to VR, really, because by that point, I've been teaching ZBrush for like 15 or 16, 17 years, something like that. And digital sculpting for me hadn't really moved on. So we had programs like Mudbox come along, Blender started in the late 90s, Modo out of Lightwave, and a lot of really good advancements, but nothing that blew my mind like ZBrush did, really. And then I found Oculus Medium was the first one. I saw where Medium was going, and I knew a lot of the faces in the Medium team. So obviously the chap that I just said, Bay Ray, he was in Valve at the time, and I kind of was on the periphery of people who were in that industry. And Medium's a voxel sculpting, so that's obviously not like we've got with Gravity Sketch. So it's very, very organic and very the geometry that comes out is very messy, but it's good for creating shapes. And that got me heavily into VR. And then I saw an opportunity there to think, right, we've got to get more into VR creation tools, whatever they are. So a few other programs popped up that, Tilt Brush was there, and Masterpiece VR, which neither of them really kind of gripped me. And then I met you guys, and I think Mike Jelniak introduced me to Gravity Sketch, and I knew it from a distance, but I'd avoided it because my only touch with NURBS and surfaces was probably well in the early 90s and mid 90s with Rhino, and a little bit in things like Maya and stuff like that. But then the potential of where that could go with character design and set design and creature design, suddenly I think we were at it would have been industry workshops in London, and that's when I thought, right, I've got to give this 2 weeks. So which is what I always do. I give a piece of software 2 solid weeks, nothing else, just that piece of software. And I did that with Gravity Sketch, and it just blew me away. I was making big robot spiders and bikes and cars, and I was as fast in Gravity Sketch as I was in Oculus Medium, which is always the test, really, is can I get faster? And it's really grown from there. And obviously my relationship with you and your team and where we went, and obviously we got the grant with you, so we're working side by side with you. And then we were in Amsterdam, and you started talking about subdivision modeling, so it was like music to my ears. It was like, yes. So then you guys started to develop sub-D in Gravity Sketch, which for me was always the golden ticket, which was to have edges, points, faces, all subdividing in a virtual environment. And that's what we've got today, really. So that's influenced probably every single job that I've taken ever since. So we do any TV work we do, any art. If we're reviewing with a client, we try and get them in there. We, between Gravity Sketch and a little bit of what's now Adobe Medium, because that still gives us that sculptural element. And we do tons and tons of concepting before we ever hit a pencil or get on the Wacom in Photoshop or even ZBrush. It might end up in ZBrush and then further on, but it generally starts in VR now. So that's kind of summarized 30 years in like 5-10 minutes.
Yeah, that's great.
When you're in VR and you don't have a traditional file drop down standard menu, it breaks you out of that mode anyway. And that's sometimes why programs like ZBrush become a problem, because people can't find what they want from, whether you're in Photoshop or you're in Maya or you're in Modo or whatever, it's generally the same. Now, with VR, you're in a room. So it's the same as being in a room with a lump of clay. And yes, you've got tools on your hands, but they're very, very available. So what you find very quickly is, and again, I'll say this for every VR, most VR tools, there's a couple that are coming out that haven't really bought into that idea. But you've got most of what you want in your hands, and you've just got to be able to get to it quickly. And one of your hands is doing most of the work. So that's the big thing. It goes, I wouldn't like to say the word analog, but it feels analog because you're actually, without having any haptics or any feedback, you're actually moving around your model, which is the golden ticket of why real sculpting is different than sculpting on a flat screen. Because you're almost interacting with what you're building, and then the big thing that's very different than anything in a screen-based 3D modeling is that you can go inside your model. So that bit about getting in a cockpit or getting on the back of a creature that you're designing, or being able to be inside an architectural piece that you're doing and looking out of the windows, that makes it a completely different experience. And it makes it better for review as well, because you can show people your ideas from different perspectives, really, not in any way, because a screen is still a screen, even though it's 3D. You're looking through a window. When you're in VR, you're moving around the room, and that's the big difference for us. But where it comes from to go to VR is a couple of questions, really. So we sometimes do 2D still. We still realize things, on an iPad or on a Wacom. We still draw some sketches. We still outline some stuff sometimes, or we get given a very strict brief, which is a piece of concept art we've been delivered, and we model to that. So it can come from a flat 2D, and then it goes into VR as a reference image, or it goes onto the iPad, and you sketch. You can, obviously with Gravity Sketch now, you can take it from the iPad into VR. But it really depends on where the end product is going. Because if it's concept art, what we generally do is we don't even really start with the sketch quite often now. If we're allowed the freedom, we sketch in VR. So and Gravity Sketch gives me most of what I want. Gravity Sketch is the best tool for that, because you've got sketching, you've got blocking, which is the blocking the shapes, the forms that you might want, that anyone who's listening who's not aware. So you're sketching, you're blocking out, but then you've got a mix of surfaces and good topology as well. So I can sketch it, block it out to get my silhouettes looking good. I can then do surfaces if I need CAD-based stuff that can come out to Rhino should I need it. But then I can also build it correctly. So a lot of people would say that VR is about concepting and giving it the idea and the ideation and getting it ready to go in a pipeline. But I can give good, clean topology that goes out into the pipeline at the modeling stage, because I can use sub-Ds. And that's happened on quite a few jobs. And that speeds me up massively. It speeds all of my team up massively. The core of it, the ideation and the bit about, there's a thing called the fuzzy front end that you know more about than I do, but there's this bit about when you're in a design phase, there's a real bottleneck of all the ideas, and the creative director and art director and design lead and the second designer, and tons of information coming in, including money and how much things cost. It's such a mess at that start. and then it gets thinner and thinner as it gets down down towards production. And what I'm finding and what we're researching a lot and looking into is how VR is speeding that up, including teaching those designers how to do what they need to do to shallow that, to reduce that fuzzy front end. So it's a real, I wouldn't say the Wild West, but at the moment it's not just a very simple tool for ideation or the core of design. What it is, it's an enabler for people to look at all of that pipeline, and then what will come out of that will be different people doing, different companies trying it for different things. So I'll give you some examples rather than rambling. So we're doing at the moment, we're working on some theatre productions where all of the layout for the theatre sets and the experiences are being done in Gravity Sketch. So those designs would normally then come out either as a screenshot or a photograph inside a Gravity Sketch, and then it'll be drawn over and painted over. But we're bringing in the art director, and when we're actually doing all of the decisions in VR, what comes out is good geometry to go straight into Maya to be used in the pipeline. So we've jumped 2 sections. If obviously no real world lighting, no PBR, physically based rendering or anything like that. But we've got the model. We've literally got the set to scale, ready to go down the pipeline. So that's changed that kind of work straight away. And what will happen from that is, if we do a good job with that, we know we'll get more work along that side. Other things like vehicle design. I know you've had James Robbins on here and people from Honda and Ford. Now we don't work in that field. We're not automotive, but I often have to design vehicles for a show. So I might be doing a concept vehicle, and I would do it probably on an iPad or in Photoshop, and then move it through those standard the normal pipeline. But I don't now. I just build it in Gravity Sketch. And then if it's organic and, if I do need to slip out of Gravity Sketch, I will go to Medium. But quite often, I probably could show you one today, designed a character on the iPad, retopologized it, brought it into Gravity Sketch in a pose, and then built a spaceship around it for a project. So it's kind of back and forth within the pipeline. It's not just linear down towards the end. So it's a big question that you asked me there. It fits in at quite a few parts of the pipeline at the moment, and it's changing rapidly as you develop Gravity Sketch and as the industry bites into it. So it's a very, very tough one to predict. If you listen to companies like Autodesk and their CEO, and you listen to how much emphasis they're putting on programs like VRED and Unreal Engine with VRED and being able to visualize and do everything virtually, it's a minefield of where we're going to go with it, but we are definitely going that way. So it's really, really exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to just touch on a couple things before we go into workflow. And one of which is, there was obviously clear pain points before adopting this technology, and there are still clear pain points that persist. And I'd like to know a little bit more about that, the pain points that you had before adopting the technology, and the ones that are still relevant even with the technology in play.
So before VR overall, then, so if we look, my kind of world was sort of like Cinema 4D, Maya, and ZBrush for nearly everything. So we've got Cinema 4D core modeler for a lot of TV work. We only adopted it because our clients made us use it. We don't care what we model in. If it's the same technology, subdivision modeling, texturing with a texture map and UVs, then we don't really care. So we can switch to anything, and including like Blender in that now. So the pinch points before would have usually been about the cost. So if you've got to bring a team on, and you've got to bring there's a cost for there's a cost for the licenses, but I mean cost about making sure people are trained. So to train a modeler to the level that we need is not a 5-minute job. It can take years to get someone to that level. And it gets harder and harder. If you get into high-end automotive, they have to have spent their entire career doing it to be able to do what some of the people that you work with and like James and people like that, it takes a long time to know all of that, not just the tools, but what the design language is for that particular thing. So automotive is a very classic one. shoes that you're looking at a lot. You're looking at trainers and developing for, high-end footwear now. That's got its own design language and its own certain specific things. And for us, the pain point there was that there's so many different types of software and so many things to learn that it can sometimes be prohibitive. But then when you jumped into VR, sometimes it's just about give me the shape or give me the model. And that's very, very easy to teach. So I teach Gravity Sketch, I teach Medium, I teach Maya, I teach Cinema 4D. And of all of them, VR is the easiest, because once somebody's got past the point of they're just in VR, it's just very simple to say, give me the shape and these are the tools. You try and do that with Maya. If you try and teach somebody Maya, by day 3, they're still rubbish. But with hour 3 with VR, generally you've got people making the shapes and making it's a different world in terms of the way those tools are absorbed by someone. And what it's also done is that bit about it's quite liberating for someone who's a technophobe. So if you've got a great designer who's been on Alias for years or has been Photoshop or Illustrator for years, jumping into 3D is incredibly hard. And I don't think until you've trained people that you realize how many people are afraid of that. And they see all this amazing artwork on ArtStation and out there on Behance and everywhere. And it's quite intimidating to get into it, and the general thought is, I'll never be like the front page of ZBrush Central or anything you see on ArtStation is amazing. There's no rubbish art on there. Now you can get people into VR very, very quickly, and they can be turning out viable shapes and designs in a very short space of time. And what that does, it's two things really. One, it gives them the confidence for them to go further faster, and it also means that they try different things, so that, and it introduces them. So I've trained people in VR who are now in the industry using ZBrush. And I ran a course for people who are it was more Oculus Medium than Gravity Sketch, but it's for people who are in a VR, came in through the VR world and have gone out as a modeler in a pipeline where the VR isn't yet absorbed. So it's an interesting, this thing about teaching in VR is going to be huge. It's something we're investing money in next, which is, how much benefit is there in teaching someone a tool in VR when the tool itself isn't in VR. So, I've seen music, people teaching mixing decks and people doing, how to fix an elevator I saw the other day in VR. So it's easier to teach it in VR. And we did one for a military company that was how to put a bridge in a war zone. And it cost millions of pounds just to test that equipment. So if you can build it and be in it, but not only so, we've had that for years with things like, VRED and viewers, but actually being in it and being able to design in it with the other person and then show them by able to draw on the models, that's very, very different territory. I'm mainly Oculus. So most of my 5, maybe 6 years of VR creation has been in Oculus with the Rift and the Rift S. Along the way, we've been sent everything. So we've got within 5 feet of me here, I've got the Windows mixed media one. I've got HTC Vive. We stuck with Oculus simply because it's the one we started with. And the hand controllers on that are for me, it's essentially a PS4 controller ripped in half with a little bit of enhancement. And initially, on the first few weeks of getting into it, I can't really remember hating it, but I remember thinking this is just very, very different. I'm a pen-based guy, so I work on a large Wacom for probably 70% of my work pre-VR. So I moved away from the mouse a long time ago. I've had the space mouse, the little twisty space mouse, for a lot of CAD-based work and even things like Cinema 4D, and that was good. But I'm much more of a pen guy. So I always thought what I want is a pen. So I use Maya, Cinema, ZBrush. I use all of them with a pen, and Wacom came along with the 3-button pen, which is obviously all it gives you is one extra button. So it gives you the equivalent of a mouse with 3 buttons. So that was a radical enhancement, wasn't it? An extra button. But then with the controllers, when I started to get into sculpting, first of all, I didn't have a problem with it. And then I was introduced to you guys in Gravity Sketch, and I got really, really comfortable with the controllers, and I forgot that there was anything else. And then I was introduced to several pens, actually. So you've mentioned the Logitech one. The first one I was introduced to was the Wacom one, which was, in my eyes, was a very difficult piece of equipment. So they'd taken their pen, put a trigger on the bottom of it, and put some, it was probably an early device, but it was quite a heavy unit. And it was trying to be all things to all men. And the one day that I tried it, I really, really struggled with it. So my feedback back went in on that. But then that made me really start talking to people who were very much in that world. So I was talking to, again, Mike Yelniak, who now works for Wacom, and you guys. I talked to you guys about it a lot. And then I started to think, right, so my workflow, I'm either drawing something or I'm modeling something, or I'm then doing all the rest, which is lighting, rigging, whatever. And actually, when I'm drawing and making volumes, I do want a pen, because when I draw, I use a pen. When I sculpt, I use my hands if I'm in the real world. When I'm on a Wacom device, when I'm drawing, I use a pen. But when I'm sculpting, I use a pen. And it doesn't feel counterintuitive. Whereas in the real world, you would never sculpt with a pen. You might have tools for shaping and one thing and another. But there isn't a real world analogy for polygon work. So you don't make polygons and pull out edges in the real world. So then I was really, really intrigued when you guys, when the thought of working with Logitech came along, and I dived right in. So basically, when I started with it, you've got what I dubbed finger gymnastics, because if you start with Gravity Sketch and you start with the top tools and you've got ink and stroke, it's absolutely packet perfect. Because if you're drawing a stroke, whether you've got haptic feedback or not, you've got the ability just to hold it in the most comfortable way you can and pull around. And that's what we call drawing, isn't it? So we're used to having a surface. So Logitech gave me a great big mouse mat. So I actually sellotaped that to the top of my Wacom, and then I had drawing on a 2D plane. That was all working incredibly well. It's basically on or off. No pressure sensitivity in the air, but when you hit a surface, so the fake surface, which was the mouse mat, then it has pressure sensitivity. So that's a dream, really, because now you've got sketching in VR, either in the air, which is like I do with tilt brush sometimes, and then I've got it on a surface, and that's great when you flatten that surface and you want to draw and bring stuff up and start doing almost like marking up. But then it gets difficult, because then you go, right, I now want to make some volumes. And making volumes isn't hard, because it's pressing points and the volume comes out. That works really well. The minute you get into polygon work or surface work with control vertices, then it's a different world. And then what you do is you have to have additional controls. So you've got sliders, and you can already see me doing it with my fingers. Suddenly that pen then isn't the same thing anymore. It's now, how do I get those extra controls? And if you watch the videos, you're going to see that I'll show in a minute. You'll see me controlling control points with a finger down here. So it looks like I'm pulling a point with a little bit like a 2-3 centimeters back down the pen. And you'll see that. So sometimes you're using the point, sometimes you're using halfway down. And I don't think that's right yet with anybody. I don't think there's Massless IO, there's Wacom coming back with theirs, there's now Logitech. And I've tried a couple of others that are very, very early in their life, and none of them have solved that completely yet. So I think for me, Logitech is the closest, and I'm loving what they're doing. I've seen what's coming next, and I like the way they're going with that. But it's not just one company to solve it. It's literally, it took us hundreds of thousands of years to get the pen right, a normal analog pen. So we've got to get this, we're not going to get it right in 5 years, 10 years maybe. So there's going to be a lot more investigating and a lot more research needed into that. And the big thing that's coming that's going to disrupt that industry is that, why do you actually need a pen at all? Because if the hand shape can do it, which is our most, the tool we're best at is that. If the VR kit knows that my hand's in that shape and it knows that's a pen, why do I need a pen? And I think that's going to disrupt the world that hasn't yet evolved with a pen. Because why would you pay for a pen if you can just pretend you've got one and you get it? And I think that might be companies like Logitech, and hopefully companies like Wacom and anyone else who's into any haptic devices. I think that's when it gets really interesting, because the knowing where your fingers are, it's you look at the iPad, it's great to just, and I use an Apple Pencil obviously, but it's great to do it with your finger sometimes, and you're using on an iPad now, even you're using one hand for some stuff and a pencil. So I think that is I think anyway that will be another 4 or 5 years of on and off and trying it, and different companies vying for that. And you'll see it in the videos when we have a look at it, how I wouldn't want you to think I'm moaning about the product, because it's quite revolutionary, but it isn't as simple as just saying it works, because there's all those factors from pen to volumes to modeling that are very, very different for me. And I'm sure some of your team will have tried it and they would have different opinions, but I have spoken to people who do what I do for a living, and they generally all seem to say the same sort of thing, really, that the modeling is where it needs to be, but both from your end, from a developer's point of view, and from the hardware point of view. And it won't be a single solution. I don't think it's going to be I don't think one person will solve it or one company will solve it. Just to ground it a little bit with the guys then, and what we did with them was they gave us a brief, which is, can you design 4 projects or come up with 4 ideas? And they gave us what they thought, and then we went back with an idea. So we went back with a basic household chair. We went back with a training shoe. We went back with a big robot, because that's what we do a lot of. And we went back with a motorbike, which we don't do a lot of, because I didn't want to do a car, if I'm honest, and be embarrassed while James Robbins was around. So we chose those for a reason, because it's organic, it's hard surface, it's domestic stuff, it's concept, it's out there. And I'm not a designer for 3 of those things. So it was quite interesting to see if someone who doesn't, so I don't design training shoes for a living. I have worked on a lot of projects where I've had to model them from scratch. So I've worked for Adidas and Nike and Gola, and I've done training shoes as a modeler, which is people don't get how complex a training shoe is to do. It's a serious piece of modeling on the underside. And people now are doing it with scanning, which is, back in the day, we didn't have the luxury of scanning. We had to model it by hand, which is, I know it's an oxymoron, but you know what I mean? We had to actually put the polygons together to make it. So that's what we did. We picked these 4. And they're not, like the training shoe, obviously, it's not like a training shoe designer, it's not at the quality, I don't think, design-wise, that some of the stuff you'd see from Laceless or Nike's designers do. But what it is it just shows that you, as someone who can model, can use a tool like Gravity Sketch and design those products very easily. And that's what's quite liberating about all this is I haven't done a lot of, I haven't done a chair for years, and I know chairs are simple, but to be able to show the workflow, which we're going to show now, is what makes it really cool. So I'll just show you some of the teasers, and then we'll take it from there. We'll have a chat about that. So the first one we did, the chair, this is a great one to talk about, because this is the most basic that we did. This in reality wouldn't take me long in any software, but it was very, very fast in Gravity Sketch. And the process is this. So we start with an idea. So I literally mooted the idea of a plastic chair with a chrome frame to Logitech, and they said, love it. That's exactly what we wanted. Go for it. So the first thing I do, the first 2 tools, so you've got basically ink and stroke, I just draw. So in the videos, you saw it already. It is literally just a case of sketching in the air with symmetry on. I just draw the shapes that I want. And you'll see me drawing a line and drawing a stroke, and then just undoing it and trying it again and doing it. And that's what you'll see me doing in Illustrator, for example, where I'm trying a stroke and editing the points, or more so you'll see me on the iPad, where it's like, do a stroke, doesn't work, do a stroke, doesn't work, tweak a stroke, doesn't work. And I'm doing exactly the same in Gravity Sketch. So that works for me in without any shadow of a doubt. That is a fantastic tool. And that's what makes me quite fast, because I'm I can see in 3D everything I do because that's my day job. I know the shape I want usually before I start, so I don't need a drawing to draw over it. I generally just make the shape I need. And because I know things like anatomy and I've done so many things over the years, you have like a reference library in your own mind. So I know what a chair looks like and I know what I want to make. So Gravity Sketch just connects that to my hand, because I can just pull out the drawing tool. So it's ink and stroke. I generally use, obviously one's a straight line and one's got a taper at each end. There's not a huge amount of difference, and you can then edit the control points. You don't see me doing that much with Sketch or with ink or with stroke. I generally just use it and leave my incorrect lines there as well. Once that's done, I can generally get a feel of whether it's going to work from that point. I never move on until that is absolutely bang on in silhouette. So as I'm spinning it around, if that works, then I know I'm on a good place. And what really helps at that point from a workflow point of view is the studio floor that you put in. So when a lot of automotive people do it, they lock vertically on Y, so you can't rotate the world. And I do that a lot for anything that's going to be seated on the ground. I put a floor in and then I just sketch to the floor, and that's it. And you'll see me do that with chairs. You'd see me do that with characters as well, because I draw from the point of view that there's every creature has a center of balance, and you have to think that has to drive through the body. So you'll see me getting that right in the sketch phase. There's none of that is worked out in the modeling. It's all done with those two tools. So that's how it always starts with Gravity Sketch for me. And then what I do is that the next workflow enhancement that for me that is amazing is I can lock that layer and make it semi-transparent. So for me, I just call that the reference layer then. And I bring the transparency down to 20%, and then that's there in the air, but very, very faint. And then I go in for the next one. I didn't do it with this one, the chair, because it was a frame. I didn't need to do a block out. I didn't need to make a solid block out. But if you look at things like this bike, for example, what I did with that, if you watch the video, or we can show that now while I'm talking later on, is even though that's a mechanical bike and it would be made in a very standard way, and it is only a concept bike, none of that works. It's just shapes to show a form. You'll see me draw it first. So I sketch it out first. And then I move to that volume tool, which I didn't use with the chair. And that means that I literally just pull out volumes. I use two types of it, which both are brilliant. So one is just a big chunk of volume. And for example, the tank might just start out by just me striking across the screen with the volume tool, and then suddenly I'll pull the points a bit and I've got a tank. Might not be accurate, but at least it's the volume. But then I might make 2 or 3 more parts very, very quickly with the volume tool. And then I switch the volume tool to planar, so I can make things like, if you look on the carburetor there, that's just shapes drawn on a plane. And then I just repeat it 6 times down and I put a block in the middle. So before I've even got to any official, what you'd call accurate modeling, I'm getting the shape language there. So I know how wide the body is. I know how wide the engine is. I know that the tank's looking right in a silhouette. So if it was all black and I span it around, it should look like the end product at this point. So they're my biggest tools and the biggest tips in the early stages, really. To get it right before you ever get to make anything accurately. Just get it right in the what we'd call it the concept stage, really, because that's concept in your own reference, really. And then, so that's a good example of the bike there, how that's showing obviously a subdivided version of the polygons for the tank and the body. So this is where it splits into a couple of different parts, really, because I still use the traditional almost NURBS-based geometry for things like certain engine parts or something that's revolved. I'll just use the surface tool. I won't even bother going into sub D because I might be remaking it later on. But things like the seat there and the tank and the fairing, they're all done in sub D. So I'm making them. Then I've stepped into polygons then. And it's only low poly. You can see it's not high res at all. And another workflow tip that I'll talk about here is the images in the background are my images from this model. So as I'm going, I photograph my own work. And then, and there's a tool in there. Again, I know you know this because it's yours, but you know, I can get like a quad view all around, and it gives me the front, the top, the side. And it's sometimes useful if you're going to change a model to stamp that into the scene, and then you've got your own reference of where you were at a given point. So if you're going to extend the bike, you know where you were as a starting point. And I use that all the time. And with the latest iteration, with the presentation tool and the new tools that have come out in the last month or so, I make a design room and I make a design wall, and I put those images on the wall. And then when I bring someone else in and we're doing either a design review or we're doing a bit of a collaboration, I'm able to walk to the model and walk to the wall. And I can't tell you how excited I was when I even heard about that the first time. But now I'm using it. It's just like a dream. That's a designer's absolute dream. Real geometry, sketching, images, and we're in the room together. So that's a, you know, I might enthuse about it, but I genuinely mean it. It's just so liberating for me.